Hello, thank you for joining us today for our session with Tennessee Valley Authority. We're going to be talking about their lessons in lifecycle, compliance, and innovation, and their unique use of Concur Request for credit card management, not travel. I'm going to be the moderator of today's discussion. My name is Larissa Kim. I am the Director of Federal Government and Government Programs at SAP Concur, and TVA, which is the shorthand version of Tennessee Valley Authority, is one of our customers in the federal government team. So I'm going to have my colleagues introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the discussion. Andrew?
Thanks. My name is Andrew Long. I'm the Manager of Accounts Payable at the Tennessee Valley Authority.
I'm Chris Walker. I'm one of the payment analysts in the expense group at Tennessee Valley Authority.
Great, thank you. So what we're going to talk about today is the TVA challenge and why request became the solution. We're also going to talk about their unique request use case, practical advice to peers, lessons learned, things they would have done differently, as well as just their overall early adopter innovation journey. They recently went live with S4 and NS2, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So first up, we would love to know what problems you were trying to solve before turning to request. Andrew?
Sure. So in 2020 and 2021, we were in the phase of replacing our in-house homegrown expense system. It had run its course and it was functional for what we needed it to do, but we were at a point where it was time to go ahead and put it away and work through what the future looked like. And so we set about implementing Concur. And one of the things that we had done in our previous system was we had taken the ability to order cards that was previously a paper form, and we put it into the system so that approvals were captured through workflows that were driven by HR hierarchies, collected the credit limits, collected the permissions you needed on your card, and so we had to figure out a way to bring that into the new system. You don't want to go back to using paper again. So while we were looking at what options we had and brainstorming with our implementation team, we don't use request like a lot of other folks do. We have a blanket authorization for travel, and not using it for that opened it up to be able to be used for ordering credit cards. It let us capture the approvals. It let us capture the amounts for credit limits. It let us capture various things that would have been captured in our paper form, but kept it all electronic and let us move forward and gave us more options and flexibility in the future as well.
Wonderful. And how many cards or how large is TVA that this was a cumbersome process that you wanted to automate?
So TVA has thousands of credit cards. We have roughly 13,000 cards, somewhere in there currently. Mixture of fuel cards, expense cards, and so it's an intensive process as far as volume goes, and so being able to have that managed by the employees, controlled by their supervisors, and make sure everything was in compliance with our controls and kept in the electronic environment was important to us.
Wonderful. And why did you decide request was the right tool? I know you gave some details, but typically our customers use it for travel. We saw some customers during COVID use it for requesting to go back into the office when there was, capacity limits and sizes of how much employees could be in an office. But we've never really seen customers use it for this. So what made you think this was the right tool to do that?
I think when you're working with your implementation team leading up to designing what the system and the processes are going to look at, you have to sit there and look at what options you have. And what we ended up at was we don't have a lot of other options. This was not being utilized, and it had the capability to do exactly what we needed to, and so it didn't just come up out of nowhere, but it took some time. And once we figured out what we had available as far as fields, approvals, tiered approvals, we were happy with what it was able to do, and we were confident that it would be able to supplant our previous process successfully.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing those details. So let's dive a little bit deeper into it. So Chris, could you help us understand what that life cycle is at TVA for your credit card request and how you go through that process?
Sure. So the very basics, what we started out with our implementation is what we still use. Basically, there's different policies we have, and it's all based upon kind of the groups we have also. But they all narrow down to someone's getting a new card, updating a kind of spend limits on their current card, as well as, if something happens to their cards, or, wear and tear on the cards, replacement cards. So they go through that, start the request, and instead of expenses, we just have kind of based upon what type of card they have, whether it's kind of a travel expense card or a fuel card, they'll only have one choice. So it makes it easy for them. Mm-hmm. And then they'll just kind of enter in their limits and spend types they have that they want to request, mm-hmm. and then they submit it on through, and then it will go up based upon the workflows that we built in during implementation. So it'll go up 3 levels, or at least till their first VP. Okay. So if they get lucky and they're working for a VP, they can get their card changed that day. And then what we kind of expanded upon over the last 2 years is working with our bank and using APIs. Mm-hmm. We're able to help automate it, because previously it would take hours throughout the day for 1 or 2 people to order cards, update cards, and just the whole process, close cards as well. So working with a report we built out through the requests that were approved, we're able to automate to pick up that report, process it through our API, and we can order new cards, we can update limits, we can order replacement cards, and then we've also started adding in, for any terminated employees, we're able to start closing cards as well. And another feature that helps with kind of in our compliance is able to block cards. So if we have transactions that have reached a certain day limits, we can be able to block them and then unblock them as well once they get actually approved.
Okay. And remind me, when did you all go live with Concur? And then you said you recently did APIs. How long did you have a non-sort of API process? What was that timeline like?
I remember because we went January 3rd, 2022, which is a great time. Then I think it would have been late 2023, early 2024. Once we had changed banks and they were able to offer that API solution for us.
Oh, that's good. Mm-hmm. So how are you enforcing controls and transparency in that process?
So based upon, this kind of goes the same for our expense side. Everyone who uses our Concur is based upon 2 groups. So it's our employees as well as our contractors. So we kind of have to limit what our contractors are able to have permission-wise. So based upon that, just like what they can see on the expense side, they also have a kind of a narrow view of what they can, policy-wise, they can process on the request side. So other than that, it works kind of about the same. So it looks a little bit different for our contractors. So for both the fuel and the other card they can order, it's just kind of their limits, whether it's monthly and single transaction limit, or just a monthly limit for our fuel card. And even for some of our other employees, like we do have a lot of interns that help throughout all our different groups, but we also want to be able to limit what they can have access to with the card. So through audit rules, we were able to establish rules so they could only choose travel and rental fuel on their cards.
Wonderful. I wish I had been an intern at TVA and had a credit card.
Well, when I started out as an intern at TVA, and
oh, wow.
I didn't have a good reason, at least, unfortunately.
Yeah. Wonderful. So also looking to understand, what are the configuration choices that you made and what mattered most when you were doing that?
Like the workflows were really helpful. It was like Andrew had mentioned in the previous system, it was just like now, it's in the same system, and it had those controls that our compliance groups really liked. So during audit, there wasn't any way for one person to maybe sideline and they had a friend or a manager another way, and they just have them approve this, and they have this credit card out there that no one knows about. So having that workflow and go up to that third level and have that VP oversight, gives that assurance that when someone has, requesting $20,000 limit or $50,000 limit, whatever it may be, and the full spread of different spend permissions, that they're able to, they truly need that. So that helps gives kind of the good controls that we were looking for. And the workflow in conjunction with the policies also help us out immensely because, for our average users, they don't really know what their cards is, and they don't interact with the system the same as we do every day. So especially with that automation I had mentioned previously, it helped in terms of fixing things when I had a card, but then I got a new request. So then suddenly 5 days later, they get a new card in the mail. Then they have two cards we got to deal with. Then we have to shut one down and figure out which one they have.
Yeah.
So the workflows, I think, were the best piece, and that's one of the things we actually haven't tweaked really at all since we've implemented Concur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So thank you for all of that. Anything else you want to add to anything Chris went over, Andrew?
I think you covered it really well. I think we're like a lot of other companies. We're looking for ways to find efficiencies and get people working on things that matter. He talked about interns completing card requests and, very labor intensive hours a day, and it frees us up to do things that are really important to the business besides ordering credit cards.
Exactly. Yeah, you can focus on your actual task and your job instead of worrying about the credit card and the administrative aspects. So as we think about what you all went through, we always have lessons learned in any sort of project. So as other regulated industries and public sector organizations are listening to this and thinking, oh, that's a great idea, maybe we should consider that, and they want to replicate it, what should they know that you haven't shared?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that your first attempt probably isn't going to work out. Second one may not either. You're going to have to hang in there. You're going to have conversations, and you're going to have to bring in all the stakeholders to be able to move forward and have a chance to be successful with it. We started conversations about finding ways to leverage this relatively early on after moving to Concur, but it wasn't until we had some changes with vendors and things like that that we got to a point where it was actionable. And even then, it took quite a bit of time to work through everything. When you automate something like this, you're sending real data through, real credit cards, real things, real liabilities. And so you have to make sure everything is laid out exactly as it should be. And our business partner worked with us, spent a lot of time with us, and so it worked well. But those conversations are important. There's internal conversations to make sure that this is the path you want to go down, that it's within the realm of what is permitted, depending on what rules and regulations you have to play by. IT, how they feel about data going out. There's lots of folks to communicate with, but continuing to have the conversations and not giving up the pursuit of automating this and other processes are what get you across the finish line. If we'd stopped after the first or second failure or no or issue, we'd still be ordering by hand for hours every day. So don't be afraid to fail, and also don't be afraid to look at a process that you designed, that's your baby. Be able to admit there may be something wrong with it and update that so that everything can run the way it should and that the process is designed effectively and in a controlled environment.
Now, we've talked a lot about the administrative efficiencies you've gained from it. What do the users think? Do they think it's a value add? Is it a positive experience? Is it easier for them to request a credit card?
One of the strengths of TVA is our diversity, and we have a diversity of users, and they feel lots of ways about many things. One thing I do know for sure, though, is that the process works for everybody. And that's one of the things that frees us up to do is provide world-class customer service to the folks that support our entire organization and are in the field working, in the offices working, and so it varies, but regulations are always going to exist, and helping folks through it's the important part.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, from your perspective, if you could have done it differently, is there anything you would have done differently?
I think we definitely would have talked with our banks that we had at the original time of implementation to see about that automation. It was still around, in 2022, and I think starting that process out earlier, I think it would have, because at the same time we were implementing it, we still had to spend those hours doing these card processes at the same time of spending hours and helping our customers learning how to work in this new system. So if we were able to leverage the efficiency that we now have, it would have made that first year a lot less stressful, I think, for us all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned being with one bank and switching to a different one. Is this something they had done with other organizations? Were you the first one they had done it with before?
Not maybe as far as Concur, I'm not sure for that, but they have had other users use their API, but even with working with them, they've been able to expand their offering because of our need of using kind of like employee numbers or whatever it may be to help identify that specific employee and make sure everything sets up correctly in the bank and then flows back into Concur when those transactions start flowing in. We are able to help expand their offering and help out other clients as well. So that was something we found out a couple months ago that we were able to help them out as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that leads into me getting to brag a little bit about TVA. So for the audience and the people listening to the recording, what is really great about TVA is they are an early adopter and very innovative in all that you do. You were one of our first Concur Cloud for Public Sector, CCPS for short, customers. When we were standing up that FedRAMP environment, you were one of the first to implement, and that's a big deal. And then also you've done this with Request, and then most recently you also went live with S4 and NS2, which is SAP's FedRAMP environment. So you're our first customer to have FedRAMP Concur talking to FedRAMP SAP. And so you're just kind of always like a little bit ahead of the charge of everybody else in the public sector space. So Chris, from your perspective, can you share about how that went? Since it was just in December that you all went live.
Like initially, I think we had heard in previous Concur Fusion sessions, about NS2, or sorry, not NS2, S4, and it's kind of some of the offerings, but we weren't really that aware of it because it didn't really impact us at the time. But once it, was kind of selected as the vendor and we started during that initial scoping, thankfully we were able to talk with some of the people on the S4 side, help design that initial kind of scoping of what we would need, what route we would need to go through, what connectors we were able to use, whether it's the native connector ICS or kind of some of the other SAP offerings, and even things like if we wanted to do Delta postings, which it's not something we may want to do, but as always, we can always go back and retweak. So we also didn't want to have to change too much on our side from expense to maybe endanger or mess up anything as far as the workflows go. But it was a fairly smooth process, and there was a little hiccup, but it was something able to quickly resolve to be able to set up that connector. I think we got it resolved probably an hour before we had to set up that call that we between all these different groups. So that was able to quickly close out that call, and we moved forward from there.
Wonderful. That's awesome. And so, Andrew, something that's, I mentioned that you guys are sort of like, you lead the charge when it comes to innovation. We see a lot of public sector organizations looking towards FedRAMP solutions. They're saying, their IT or their legal or their security is telling them to evaluate and look for FedRAMP solutions and start swapping out their technology for that. But we don't see a lot of organizations kind of move as swiftly and quickly as TVA does with those decisions. Can you help us understand why are FedRAMP solutions sort of important to TVA?
Well, I'll say this, it doesn't feel like it moves really fast on the inside, but it's right now, cybersecurity is more critical than ever, and the Tennessee Valley depends on our organization to provide energy to the entire region, and cybersecurity is a key part of that. That's real quick way to end up not being able to do that, and so coordinating with IT, legal, and cybersecurity, making sure everybody's aligned and on the same page, which is seems like an impossible task sometimes, but having everybody sit down, discuss things, making sure everybody understands what's required, and understanding the risk. Understanding what is available, the tools and options, all those things. When you put them in, an organized line and look through it, FedRAMP solutions ensure that number one, we're secure, we're in compliance, and that our business partners that we're working with, and the folks that we work with and implement these contracts with are on the same page. FedRAMP is really, I think one of the most important part is the alignment it provides, that it's an expectation from our organization as a federal agency, and it's an agreement and a partnership with you all at SAP that you understand that those things are valuable and crucial to our business.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else either of you gentlemen want to add about either thing, about your transformation with SAP and NS2, or about requests that we haven't touched on yet?
Don't be afraid to make a mistake. If you're not making mistakes, you're not doing anything. So you're going to mess up, and you should plan to, but make sure that you're continuing down the path. Complacency is your worst enemy with this, because it would have been much easier not to go through this process, and much easier not to test these things and go through the growing pains and work with our customers. So make some mistakes responsibly, but just know it's going to happen.
Fortune favors the bold.
It does sometimes.
Sometimes.
And I kind of like Andrew said, no matter what you think and you're preparing for, you are going to miss something. It happened to us both on implementation of Concur as well as the implementation of S4. But thankfully, we had good partners both on with SAP in our TVA partners as well as our implementation partners. So we were able to quickly overcome all the issues we've had so far. So and even before with our implementation as well as with the bank when we set up the API, it was hopefully this sets up things right. Hopefully it doesn't order someone 10 cards, too many times at least. So, but not being afraid to fail is definitely a good thing to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, gentlemen. This was very enlightening, I'm sure, for the audience. So we just want to make sure to remind everybody that we really appreciate your feedback. When we do these sessions, we want to understand what you took that was valuable, things that you want to hear in the future, things you want to hear in future sessions. So please take the time to give us your feedback. And we just, from myself, Andrew, and Chris, we want to thank you for your time today and hope you enjoyed our session.